Straight ahead, protests flare. Dozens of people are arrested at UT after failing to disperse when ordered. Why state lawmakers disagree on the university's response. Marquee race. We speak with both major candidates for U.S. Senate in Texas. Why Republican incumbent Ted Cruz and Democratic challenger Congressman Colin Allred took different votes on a foreign aid bill for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. Squaring off, the Democrats vying in next month's runoff election for Dallas County Sheriff took part in a debate. I asked them why voters should choose them. Good morning, I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics starts now. Hello and welcome to Eye on Politics. Hope your weekend is going well. We've got a packed show for you on this Sunday. We begin with the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel protests on college campuses at UT in Austin, UT Dallas, along with Columbia University in New York City. At UT's flagship campus, dozens of protesters were arrested Wednesday when they failed to disperse as ordered by police. One of the 57 people arrested was a news photographer for an Austin TV station who was knocked to the ground by officers. Travis County dropped the charges against the protesters. UT President Jay Hartzell wrote to students and faculty saying, quote, "Peaceful protests within our rules are acceptable. Breaking our rules and policies and disrupting others' ability to learn are not allowed." The group that led this protest stated it was going to violate institutional rules. Our rules matter and they will be enforced. Our university will not be occupied. On the second day of protests, there were more students and faculty who joined, but law enforcement did not need to step in. Republican State Senator Brandon Creighton of Conroe said UT did the best it could under the circumstances.
What goes too far is showing up to occupy university space for the purpose of calling out Jewish students and the Jewish community on campus and chanting anti-Israel chants throughout the protest. An effort to absolutely duplicate and repeat what happened at Columbia University just a few days before is just unacceptable.
The chair of the House Democratic Caucus, State Representative Trey Martinez Fisher of San Antonio, said it's UT's response was not its best work.
My question would be, does that automatically require riot police and riot gear with physical weapons? And does that require, altercations that resulted in physical contact and potential injury? I'm not so sure that the remedy met the response. And so again, it's important that we understand these things, and President Hartzell, has the absolute right to protect the students on campus, but I don't believe you can justify that, by letting other people get hurt in the process.
The situation was more calm at UT Dallas and Richardson. That's where some pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel students led a sit-in at the administration building Tuesday. They dispersed after the university's president agreed to meet with them and with a group of Jewish students. Pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel demonstrations first ignited a storm of controversy at Columbia University. Some people there called for death to Jews and made statements against Israel and the U.S. A rabbi at Columbia messaged nearly 300 Jewish students to go home until it is safe to return. We spoke with both major candidates for U.S. Senate in Texas about this, Republican incumbent Ted Cruz and Democratic Congressman Colin Allred.
While folks have a right to protest, chanting things like that are deeply anti-Semitic or that are threatening is a line that once that's crossed, then that's no longer a protest. This is now an aggressive action that's inflicting on the rights of someone else. And that's what I've seen happening on these college campuses. And so to me, it's gotten out of hand. We have to get it back under control. This is a very, very real threat. And I do not want to see any student feeling like they're not going to be welcome in their own settings because of who they are, or how they identify, or how they pray.
Should the U.S. Justice Department and Education Department be taking a closer look and doing more to protect Jewish students?
I think so. I really do. I think this has to be a local, state, and federal response at every level to try and make sure that while we're in this moment of tension, that no one is feeling in the United States under threat for their own physical safety, or that they as a community are being targeted in a way that's dangerous.
Should the Justice Department and Education Department, U.S., be doing something?
Yes, yes, yes. What is happening at our universities is disgraceful. This vicious anti-Semitism is utterly unacceptable. We're seeing it at Columbia, at NYU, at Yale. Sadly, we're seeing it in Texas, at the University of Texas. We're seeing radical activists who are pro-Hamas, who are chanting in favor of the Hamas terrorists that butchered 1,200 people on October 7th, that raped women and little girls. This is good versus evil. You know, it was really sad this weekend when the Orthodox rabbi at Columbia sent out an email to all the Jewish students on campus saying, go home and stay home because Columbia won't protect your safety. That is fundamentally wrong. And I believe, as I said in the rally tonight, that if anyone threatens the safety of another student, they should be arrested, they should be prosecuted, they should be expelled, and if they're not from America, they should be deported.
We'll have more of our interviews with both Cruz and Allred coming up. The U.S. Supreme Court's decision not to hear a case out of Louisiana could impact protests organized here in Texas. Sarah Jenkins explains in this week's brief.
Organizing a protest in Texas is now riskier than ever. This stems from a case that dates back to a 2016 Black Lives Matter protest. A police officer sued organizer DeRay McKesson after being injured at that protest. Citing the First Amendment's freedom of assembly protection, McKesson argued the lawsuit should be blocked and he is not held accountable for someone else's actions. But the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, ruled the First Amendment does not apply where a defendant creates unreasonably dangerous conditions. Ultimately, the case was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which decided not to hear it, leaving the ruling in place and setting a new precedent that a protest organizer can be sued and held responsible in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi for the actions of any person present at a protest.
Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. believes he's already qualified to be on the ballot in Texas this November. He made an appearance in Dallas last week to speak at the EarthX Environmental Conference. How soon do you think you'll be able to get on the ballot here in Texas for November? And with polls showing most Democrats are going to vote for Biden, most Republicans are going to vote for Trump, what do you think your path to victory is?
We need to get 113,000 signatures in this state. I think as of today, we already have over 200,000. If President Trump drops out, I will beat President Biden very badly by a landslide. And that if President Trump drops out, I will beat President Trump. President Biden cannot beat President Trump, whether I'm in the race or out of the race. Oh, I'm the only candidate running that can beat President Trump, according to all the polls that we've done and we've seen.
One of Kennedy's promises is that he'll be the greatest environmental president. I asked him how that guides his energy policy and whether it will be bad for Texas.
One thing that maybe the gas industry will object to is I'm against LNG. I don't think we should be exporting natural gas. I think we ought to be using natural gas in this country. The gas that we have, we ought to be using it in this country to give us an advantage in rebuilding our industrial base.
Now to some other political stories this week. The state of Texas's mail-in voting rules will remain in place after the U.S. Supreme Court chose not to hear a case challenging them. In Texas, voters are only eligible to vote by mail in certain cases, including being 65 and older. A 2020 lawsuit called this age-based discrimination. The Fifth Circuit Court of U.S. Appeals sided with the state, and so that ruling remains. Democratic lawmakers continue to campaign for reproductive rights. On Thursday, North Texas Congressman Mark Vesey and State Representative Nicole Collier appeared with the U.S. House Democratic Whip Catherine Clark of Massachusetts. They did so at a Planned Parenthood in Fort Worth. They want to turn Roe v. Wade into federal law, but Clark told us that won't happen with this current Congress.
And that's why this is going to be a huge issue on the ballot in November. And in every single state, red, blue, or purple, where it has been on the ballot, reproductive freedom has won, and that's what we're going to see in November.
Coming up, Senator Cruz and Congressman Allred discuss their opposing votes on the foreign aid bill to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. And later, why Dallas County Sheriff Marion Brown and former Sheriff Lupe Valdez say they're the better candidate in next month's runoff. Welcome back to Eye on Politics. Now to the marquee matchup in Texas this fall, the battle for U.S. Senate between two-term Republican incumbent Ted Cruz and his Democratic challenger, Congressman Colin Allred of Dallas. The Real Clear Politics average of polls shows Cruz leads Allred by 7 percentage points, 46 to 39%. The Cook Political Report rates this seat likely R. This past week, I interviewed both candidates, and I asked Allred about his path to victory.
Well, I remember when I ran in 2018 that no one thought we were going to win that race until the very, very end, when folks started to catch on that it was going to be a very competitive race. And of course, I ended up being successful against a 22-year incumbent. And the same approach here applies, which is that we're trying to build a broad coalition of Texans, of Democrats, yes, but independents and Republicans as well.
The Biden administration recently announced $6.4 billion from the CHIPS Act as far as Samsung, so that they can expand in Central Texas. There are other facilities in North Texas, and to Texas Instruments, Global Wafers. How important is this to the Texas economy and to national security?
It's important for our national security because folks have to understand that everything we do, our phones, our cars, has these chips in it. But so much of that market is controlled and manufactured in places like Taiwan that are under risk and at risk from China. Unfortunately, Ted Cruz voted against the Chips and Science Act, and I think that was a bad vote. John Cornyn voted for it. In fact, he's one of the reasons it got through the Senate. I'm one of the reasons it got through the House. Ted Cruz showed, I think, in that case, that he was, again, just putting partisanship or what's best for our state.
In February, you voted against a bill that would have undone the Biden administration's freeze on approvals for new liquefied natural gas exports. Why did you take that vote, and does it hurt Texas?
Well, that wasn't the exact vote. They were changing, I think, the process there of how it would be approved. I disagree with the Biden administration's freeze on LNG licenses. I think that's bad for Texas. I think it's bad for our national security. And I joined a letter that we sent to the administration, Texas Democrats, saying that this is incredibly important for our economy. And so I disagree with it. I think that LNG has an incredibly important role in our economy, but also in helping us wean our European allies off of Russian gas.
Just to clarify, the vote was a no vote on this, at least according to the records I looked up. Is that accurate?
Well, I'd have to check as well, but my memory of it is that it wasn't directly on trying to we have not had a vote on overturning that policy. It was a vote on changing the way LNG is considered and whether it runs through the Department of Energy on the approvals process.
And Israel, you also voted to approve funding for Israel. Talk to me about the importance of that in your opinion.
The funding that we provided to Israel I think is important. A lot of it was to resupply some of the defensive systems that they have that, for example, stopped the Iranian drone and missile attacks from being much, much worse than they could have been. And so that I think is really important. But I want Texans to also know that there's $9 billion in that package of humanitarian aid to help deal with the humanitarian crisis that is ongoing in Gaza. So I think this is an approach that is the right one.
Let's talk about border security. Would you have voted for the bipartisan bill that was developed and then kind of fell flat in the Senate?
I was hoping it would get to the House, and I did support it and put out a statement to that effect because to me this was a serious attempt to deal with what we were actually experiencing on the border, which is really centering in many ways around the asylum process. And I want North Texans to understand this. What we're seeing at the border is that a lot of folks are coming and declaring and asking for asylum. About 90% of those applicants are going to be rejected ultimately. But it's taking us 5, 6, 7, 8 years for that process to play out and for that rejection to be issued. And this was an attempt to really solve that issue. No state would have benefited more from that than Texas. And that's why I find it really hard to understand why Senator Cruz opposed that. But instead, I think he wants to run on the issue in November. And to me, that has to be outrageous and unacceptable to every Texan.
We caught up with Cruz after a political event in Fort Worth Wednesday night, and I asked him why he voted against the Senate's aid package to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan.
I am a passionate defender of Israel. I've been the leading defender of Israel for 12 years in the Senate, and I'm very, very glad that we are finally providing emergency military aid to Israel. We should have provided it 6 months ago. Back in November, I forced a vote on the Senate floor to provide emergency military aid right after October 7th. And sadly, every single Democrat voted no. They held it hostage. The bill that came out of the Senate last night, there are elements of it that I strongly support, especially the Israel military aid. But the reason that I had to vote no is that it was combined with, number one, billions of dollars of money that can go to NGOs that are helping human traffickers bring illegal aliens into the state of Texas. And number two, this bill did nothing to stop the crisis at our southern border. The state of Texas is being invaded. We're seeing over 11 million people who've crossed illegally under Joe Biden. I believed we should have used this opportunity to finally do something to secure the border, and unfortunately, Senate Democrats refused to do that.
But can't both be done?
They can, and they should have both been done, and I would have enthusiastically voted yes if both were being done, but the position of Senate Democrats was they're not willing to secure the border. That's the position of House Democrats, too. They support open borders. It's why we've seen House Democrats repeatedly vote in favor of open borders. It's why Colin Allred has voted repeatedly in favor of open borders.
Congressman Allred told me yesterday that you stand in the way of bipartisan votes, such as this bill, the Senate border security bill, which went nowhere, and the CHIPS Act. How do you respond to that?
Well, listen, Congressman Allred likes to talk. But if you actually look at his first 4 years in the House, he voted 100% with Nancy Pelosi. He literally did not deviate on a single vote. He's voted repeatedly in favor of open borders. That's not good for Texas. Just a few weeks ago, he voted in favor of Joe Biden's halting the export of liquid natural gas. That hurts Texas. And so that's a voting record that is wildly out of step with the people of Texas. At the same time, I think elections are about records, about what people have accomplished. In my time in the Senate, I have authored and passed 99 different pieces of legislation into law. In the 7 years Allred has been in the Congress, he's authored and passed 3 pieces of legislation.
You can watch both of their full interviews on our website, cbsnewstexas.com, and go to the Eye on Politics section. Coming up, why Dallas County Sheriff Marion Brown and former Sheriff Lupe Valdez say they're the better candidate in next month's runoff. One of the closest races being watched in Dallas County is the Democratic primary runoff on May 28th between incumbent Sheriff Marion Brown and her former boss, former Sheriff Lupe Valdez. She handpicked Brown to succeed her. 10 days ago, I moderated a debate between them, sponsored by the Dallas Democratic Forum.
We have been leading from the front.
I've done it before, and I can do it again.
Both Sheriff Marion Brown and former Sheriff Lupe Valdez made their case to dozens of members of the Dallas Democratic Forum on why they should win their Democratic primary runoff next month. I asked Valdez why she is running against Brown, who she hired as chief deputy, one of her top lieutenants.
Some people say she wants her old job back. I don't want my old job back. There's a lot of stuff I can do. Correctional officers will tell you things are not improving, they're getting worse. And so I made the decision. After 3 years of several folks asking, of seeing, and I did volunteer to come and help on my own time, and it was turned out.
In response, Brown said she wouldn't have been Valdez's hand-picked successor and appointed by county leaders if she hadn't done a good job as the number 3 person in the department.
So when I hear this, there are 30 people who have asked for my opponent to return. I say to you, there are 2,100 employees at that department. What percentage of 2,100 is 30? And so if there's that percentage that is saying come back, I'm okay with that, because I realize that in the real world, if you have 2,100 employees, you're not going to please everybody.
A recent report by the Dallas Morning News found that after Dallas County implemented a new computer system in May of last year, inmates in the jail were being lost. Attorneys told the newspaper their clients have been stuck in jail weeks past their release dates, among other problems.
The system does not belong to us.
But it's supposed to work with the jail's computer system. Brown says her staff doesn't want to keep people in jail who shouldn't be there.
We're having to manually do some of our processes because of a system that will not communicate properly with our system. So when you ask, well, what are we going to do about it? We have to continue pressing our partners to help us look manually.
Every time there's a systems change, there's problems in the court and the jail.
Valdez acknowledged that she and her administration faced a similar problem a decade earlier, when a new computer system left some inmates lost as well. She said she took action.
The whole department was talking about how Sheriff Valdez rolled up her sleeves, started taking the inmates, transporting them, get them out of there. Whatever you need to do to meet the challenge, you do it.
Both said what gives them the most satisfaction on the job is identifying what needs to be improved and making it better. And that's all for Eye on Politics this week. I'm Jack Fink. I am listening, and we are listening at CBS News Texas. Happy Passover to all those who've been celebrating this past week. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you again next week. And from all of us here, have a great Sunday.